The Hidden Daughter of 1891. What the Rothschild family buried in their estate walls. It began with a sound, faint, hollow, and easily dismissed. In the summer of 1891, workmen were tasked with repairing the west wing of the Rothschild family's private estate in the English countryside. The mansion was vast, silent, and heavy with the weight of secrets. But when one of the masons struck his chisel against a particular patch of stone, the echo that returned wasn't solid. It was empty, as if the wall itself was breathing. At first, no one said a word. The foreman, nervous about offending his employers, ordered the men to move on. Yet by dusk, curiosity overcame obedience. One of the younger workers pressed his ear to the wall and swore he heard something faint, not the rustle of rats or the shift of air, but a soft, trembling hum, almost like the voice of a child humming a lullaby. He stepped back pale-faced. "Sir," he whispered, "there's something in there." By the next morning, whispers had already reached the servants' quarters. The Rothschilds were not merely wealthy, they were untouchable. Their estate was a world apart, guarded by rules unspoken but deeply understood. Do not ask, do not look, do not speak. And yet, walls don't hum by themselves. The West Wing was the oldest part of the mansion, built when the family's fortune was still young. Its corridors were narrower, colder, and avoided by most servants after dark. Candles flickered strangely there, as if the air itself disliked light. The workers returned reluctantly, ordered by the estate's steward, a sharp, stone-faced man named Mr. Devereux, who carried the Rothschild seal on his coat and an unblinking loyalty in his eyes. He stood watching as the men tapped again along the wall. This time, the hollow sound came clearer, a deep, echoing void behind layers of plaster and brick. Devereux's jaw tightened. "Stop," he ordered. But the youngest mason, unaware of the weight of those words, struck one more blow. The chisel sank deeper than it should have. Dust poured out. A cold wind, sharp and ancient, slipped through the crack. The men froze as the scent of decay drifted from the opening, faint but unmistakable. Devereux's face went ashen. He barked for the men to leave at once. The site was sealed by sundown, guarded by estate watchmen until further notice. The workers were paid in full, and warned never to speak of what they'd found. But silence, in a house that large, never lasts long. By the third night, servants whispered that they'd seen candlelight flickering through the cracks in the boarded-up corridor. Others claimed they heard footsteps behind the sealed wall, light, hurried steps, like those of a small child running across wooden floors. One maid swore she heard crying. No one dared to check. Down in the servants' kitchen, Mrs. Langford, the head housekeeper, told the others that the West Wing had been closed for over 20 years. "No one goes there," she said, voice low. "Not since the lady's illness." "What illness?" a scullery maid asked. Mrs. Langford didn't answer. She simply crossed herself and whispered, best not to ask questions that were never meant to be answered. But questions have a way of clawing through silence. A week later, one of the dismissed workmen returned to the village tavern, unable to sleep. He confessed to seeing something when the wall cracked, something pale, like a sliver of lace or bone, before Devereux ordered the site sealed. No one believed him. Yet his trembling hands and bloodshot eyes told a story that words could not. By autumn, the Rothschild estate was quieter than ever. Guests stopped visiting. Servants resigned in sudden haste. And the once bustling West Wing remained locked, its door barred from the inside. Still, on certain nights, when the wind howled through the oaks, the villagers swore they could hear it, that same soft humming, carried faintly from the mansion's direction. A song no one could name, a child's voice no one claimed. And so began the legend of the Hidden Daughter of 1891, the secret the Rothschilds would bury in their own walls. 2 weeks after the West Wing was sealed, the house painter Elias Carter was summoned to retouch a few aging frames in the upper gallery, a long, echoing corridor filled with portraits of Rothschild ancestors. He'd worked for the family before enough to know the rules: eyes down, mouth shut, and never linger in one place too long. The gallery was silent except for the sound of brushes against varnish. Golden frames gleamed under the light of oil lamps, faces of stern bankers, and powdered ladies staring back in painted pride. Yet near the end of the hall, behind a curtain of dust and cobwebs, Elias noticed something strange. A canvas turned backward against the wall. He hesitated. No one had mentioned an unfinished painting. When he turned it over, his hands froze midair. It was the portrait of a young girl, perhaps 7 years old, dressed in pale blue silk. Her hair, a deep chestnut brown, was styled in the same fashion as the Rothschild children from the 1870s. But what seized Elias's breath was her eyes, unmistakable gray-green, the same piercing color seen in every heir of the family's main line. The nameplate at the bottom read nothing. No title, no date, just a blank brass plaque. He stared, heartbeat quickening. The brush strokes were fine, deliberate. This was no servant's child or fanciful commission. Whoever she was, she had been painted by Rothschild's own court artist, the same man who'd captured the family's portraits for 3 generations. But there was no record of her. Not in the archives, not in the family tree displayed in the study, not in any of the servants' whispered recollections. A daughter who never existed. That evening, Elias mentioned the portrait to Mr. de Varel, the steward. He expected mild curiosity. Instead, the man's expression turned to iron. "Where did you see it?" De Varel demanded. "In the gallery, sir. Near the end." De Varel's eyes darkened. Without another word, he ordered Elias to pack his things and leave the estate immediately. No explanation, no payment delay. Just a single warning as he handed him his coat. "Forget what you saw. And if you value your family, never speak of her again." Elias left before dawn. But that night, as rain lashed against his cottage windows, he swore he heard knocking, 3 short taps, soft and childlike, at his door. When he opened it, no one was there. Only a small smear of wet paint on the doorstep, the same pale blue as the girl's dress in the painting. Back at the mansion, Mrs. Rothschild reportedly fell ill soon after. Her condition was described as melancholia, a word often used in those days for a grief that refused to name its cause. She stopped hosting dinners. The piano in the drawing room was covered in a white cloth. Even her children, once paraded proudly through London society, were sent away to boarding schools for their safety. But the portrait, that forbidden painting, did not vanish. It was said to have been locked in the attic, wrapped in cloth and hidden behind stacks of furniture. Only one maid, Agnes, ever went near it after that, sent to dust the old relics of the estate. Years later, in her old age, she told her granddaughter something that was never written down, but passed as a whispered truth. Sometimes the cloth would slip off, and I'd see her eyes, wide open, though the paint was cracked. And once, only once, I could have sworn her lips moved. By the winter of 1890, a thick unease hung over the estate. The servants avoided the upper floors. Guests whispered that the Rothschilds had become reclusive. One evening, a visiting cousin asked Mr. Rothschild directly over supper, "Who was the child in the blue dress?" "The one in the painting above the stairs." The room fell silent. The candles flickered. Mr. Rothschild's knife clattered against the plate. "There is no such painting," he said coldly. But there was. And even as he denied it, his wife's trembling hand reached beneath the table, clutching her locket so tightly her knuckles turned white. Inside that locket, unseen by anyone at that table, was the same child's face, faded, but real. Some secrets can be painted over, sealed away, or buried behind stone. But they never disappear, especially when the walls themselves remember the name you tried to erase. Her name was Clara Whitmore, and when she arrived at the Rothschild estate in 1888, she was just 24, bright educated, and eager to make a life beyond the gray London streets that had raised her. She came recommended from a respected finishing school, her handwriting elegant, her manner calm. She was hired to teach the youngest Rothschild child, or so she was told. But when she arrived, there were no children in the nursery. The toys were there, though. Dolls seated neatly in a circle, a cradle, a half-finished puzzle. But the room was quiet, too quiet. Dust coated the windowsills, as though no laughter had echoed there in years. When Clara asked the housekeeper, Mrs. Langford, about her pupil, the woman avoided her gaze. "She's delicate," she said finally. "You'll know when you're meant to." That night, as the wind moaned through the trees, Clara wrote in her diary, "There is a child here, I am sure of it. I feel her presence in the halls, hear her steps above my room. But no one speaks her name." For weeks, Clara was kept waiting. She wandered the corridors, taking her meals in silence. She began to notice strange patterns. A tray left outside the west wing door with food barely touched, small garments hanging in the laundry that belonged to no one, and once, a faint giggle echoing down the stairwell when no child was in sight. Finally, one gray morning, she was summoned. Mr. Devereux, the steward, led her down a narrow servants' corridor to the sealed west wing. The air grew colder with each step. At the end of passage stood a heavy oak door. "You'll tutor her here," he said quietly. "The child is not to leave these rooms. She is sensitive. The family wishes for privacy." He unlocked the door, motioned her inside, and shut it behind her. At first, Clara could see nothing. Curtains drawn, light dim, the air thick with lavender and dust. Then a movement, small, hesitant, near the far window. A girl stood there, barefoot, in a white dress that brushed the floor. She couldn't have been more than 8. Her skin was pale, her hair a deep brown. But it was her eyes that caught Clara's breath, gray-green, sharp and familiar, the same that stared out from every Rothschild portrait in the main hall. "Hello," Clara whispered. The girl tilted her head, almost curious, then said softly, "They told me not to speak to anyone." Her voice was calm, almost musical. But behind that calm, Clara sensed something fractured. The lessons began quietly. Reading, recitation, small songs on an out-of-tune piano. Yet Clara noticed strange details. The girl never mentioned her parents by name. She avoided mirrors. And sometimes, when Clara entered the room, she would find the child whispering to the wall, as if someone were listening from the other side. One night, while closing her books, Clara asked gently, "Do you ever go outside?" The girl looked up, expression blank. "They say the sun doesn't want me." Clara began to fear something was terribly wrong. She wrote letters to her sister in London, letters that were never answered. She grew pale, restless. Servants said they'd see her standing by the locked west wing after dark, ear pressed against the door. And then, one morning in 1889, Clara was gone. Her room was found empty, her belongings neatly folded, her diary missing. The Rothschilds informed the staff that she had resigned suddenly due to ill health. But the housemaids whispered otherwise. Some said they'd heard a scream in the night, a single, sharp cry that was silenced too fast. Others claimed Mr. Devereux carried a small, covered bundle out to the garden before dawn. No police were ever called. 2 years later, during renovations, Clara's diary was found beneath the floorboards of her room, its pages damp, ink faded, but her final entry still legible. "The child is not sick. She is hidden. Hidden because of what she knows, or what she reminds them of. Tonight, I will tell the truth. If I do not return, let this book speak for me." The entry ended there. And the very next day, the West Wing was sealed. The same wall the workers would later strike in 1891, where the air itself hummed like a child's lullaby. Among the Rothschilds, records were sacred. Births, baptisms, marriages, inheritances, every detail was inked, stamped, and preserved in ledgers bound in red leather. Generations of precision and order. But tucked deep inside the family archives of 1883, one page was missing. A torn space where a birth should have been. It was Mrs. Rothschild's year of confinement, a year marked by silence in the newspapers and an absence of appearances in London society. Her husband, Baron Edwin Rothschild, had claimed she was unwell. Some said she suffered from melancholy after childbirth. Others whispered she had lost a child entirely. Yet there was no death certificate, no parish record, no grave, just a blank where a name should have been written. Decades later, when the family historian compiled a genealogical index, he noticed it too. The records for 1883 stopped abruptly and resumed months later as if a single entry had been erased. When he inquired with the archivist, the man merely said, "That page was removed by the Baron himself. Best not to pursue it." But even back in 1883, the servants knew something was wrong. That spring, the midwife had been summoned from London under strict secrecy. Her carriage arrived at midnight. No one was allowed to see her enter the mansion. For 3 days, the house went still. Curtains drawn, carriages absent, no music, no guests. Then suddenly, a lullaby. Mrs. Langford, the housekeeper, recalled hearing the faint cry of a newborn echo down the West Hall. She smiled then, relieved that the lady had delivered safely. But her joy was short-lived. By morning, the crying had stopped. And from that day forward, no one mentioned the baby again. The nursery door was locked. The cradle removed. The wet nurse dismissed without notice. Yet months later, the maids found tiny footprints pressed into the dust along the corridor, too small for any of the older children. When they asked, they were told it was an old stain, a trick of light and shadow. But how does shadow leave a trail that leads to a locked door? Rumors grew among the staff. Some claimed the child was born disfigured, a cruel fate in an era obsessed with appearances. Others whispered she was the product of scandal, a child whose existence could destroy the family's reputation. A child with Rothschild blood, but not a Rothschild name. Mrs. Langford overheard a single argument between the Baron and his wife, a muffled storm behind closed doors. "You cannot hide her forever," the lady wept. "Then she must never have been born," came the Baron's reply. From that day, the West Wing became forbidden ground. Curtains drawn. Locks changed. Only the governess, Clara Whitmore, was granted access, and only when the child grew old enough to ask questions that could not be answered. It explained the girl's isolation, the reason no doctor visited openly, and why no servant was allowed near. The Rothschilds had built their empire on control of banks, of markets, of nations. But here, within their own walls, they tried to control something even greater: shame. Yet shame has a way of festering in silence. By 1891, when workers broke through that wall, the air that escaped had not been touched by sunlight in years. It carried the scent of lavender, damp stone, and something darker, a secret preserved like a corpse. Years later, when a minor descendant attempted to rebuild the West Wing, he found fragments of a birth certificate wedged behind an old beam. Most of it was ruined by moisture, but one word remained legible: Eleanor. A name that appeared nowhere in the Rothschild lineage. No baptism, no grave, no record. Just Eleanor, the child who was never recorded, yet could not be erased. And somewhere beyond the sealed wall, her lullaby still lingered. In 1891, after the West Wing was sealed, the servants' quarters grew heavy with silence. The mansion seemed to listen. Every whispered word, every nervous step, felt overheard. Yet, in that suffocating quiet, a few dared to write. Beneath the floorboards of a small chamber once belonging to a maid named Evelyn Marsh, workers later found a bundle of old letters tied with twine, fragile with age, edges burnt as though someone had tried to destroy them. The ink was faded, but enough remained to tell a story that the Rothschilds never intended to be read. The letters were exchanged between Evelyn and a footman named Thomas Keene, both of whom worked on the estate between 1887 and 1891. What they revealed was more than gossip, it was witness. Letter, March 2nd, 1889. Thomas, she exists. I've seen her. The girl they pretend is gone. She walks the west corridor when the house sleeps. I thought she was a ghost until I heard her speak. She asked for her mother. Her voice was so clear, but they hush her away as though she never was. Letter, April 9th, 1889. They've told me to stay out of the West Wing. Mrs. Langford says it's for my own good. But why would they keep a child hidden? Thomas? Why feed her through a door? She's not sick. I saw her handprint on the glass this morning. So small. So real. Evelyn's letters grew increasingly desperate over the months that followed. She described hearing soft singing, the same lullaby that had haunted the house since the repairs began, and seeing Mr. Devereux carrying trays into the sealed hallway late at night. Once, she claimed she followed him. Letter, July 11, 1889. He unlocked the door. I swear I saw a candlelight move inside. And then her voice, not crying, just humming, as though she'd made peace with her cage. But he looked back suddenly. I ran before he saw me. He frightens me now, Thomas. He's not guarding a secret. He's burying it alive. In one of the final letters, dated December 1889, Evelyn wrote of the night Clara Whitmore disappeared. Thomas, it happened. She screamed. One scream only, then silence. Mr. Devereux said she left the house that night, but there were no carriage wheels on the gravel, no lanterns, no farewells. I think the lady knows. She's grown pale and prays in her room. The Baron hasn't left his study in days. Her final message, January 1890, was almost unreadable. Stained with water, words smeared, or perhaps tears. They've bricked it up. I heard them hammer through the night. I tried to stop them, but Mrs. Langford pulled me away. It's done, she said. For her sake. I can still hear her, the little one knocking, as if she thought they were playing. God forgive them. After that, no further letters were found. Both Evelyn and Thomas left the estate the following spring. Evelyn was said to have gone to London, though no records of her employment were ever traced. Thomas vanished entirely. When historians examined the letters decades later, some doubted their authenticity. Yet handwriting analysis confirmed the same hands had written and signed the notes. And when the West Wing wall was eventually reopened in a private investigation of 1907, faint indentations were found on the inside bricks, small, shallow markings, as if scratched by tiny fingers. They matched perfectly with the description in Evelyn's last letter. For the Rothschilds, the servant letters became a ghost they could not silence. They tried to buy them back, to erase the evidence, to call them forgeries. But the truth was already too deep. Because sometimes the voices of the lowest, the unseen, the unspoken, are the only ones that survive. And through Evelyn's trembling words, the hidden daughter spoke again. The winter of 1890 came early that year. Snow blanketed the Rothschild estate like a burial shroud, muting every sound but the crunch of boots on frozen gravel. The mansion glowed with candlelight that December, preparing for its grand winter banquet. A rare event meant to prove to London society that the family was still as brilliant, as untarnished as ever. Carriages rolled through the iron gates. Laughter and perfume filled the halls. The chandeliers, long covered in dust, were lit again, their crystals scattering light across marble and portrait alike. But beneath that glitter, an unease crept like a draught. The servants whispered that the West Wing's door, sealed for months, had been unlocked that morning. No reason given, just unlocked. The banquet began in the ballroom, where a quartet played softly beneath the painted ceilings. The Baron was all charm and composure, his smile the mask of a man desperate to forget. His wife sat beside him, pale but poised, wearing a string of pearls that gleamed like tears. Among the guests was Dr. Amos Heller, a physician known for his discretion. He arrived unannounced, carrying a small leather case. His presence drew murmurs, for who invited a doctor to a celebration? Mrs. Langford, the housekeeper, was seen guiding him toward the west corridor during dinner. She returned an hour later, her face the color of chalk. The clock struck 9. The orchestra swelled. Champagne glasses clinked. Yet in the midst of the laughter, several guests later recalled a sound, faint, almost lost beneath the music. It was singing, a single, soft melody, rising and falling like a cradle song. It came from somewhere above, echoing faintly through the vents. A woman near the piano froze, her fork halfway to her lips. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Others heard it too. The hum of a child's voice. The same notes again and again, high, sweet, and terribly lonely. The Baron stood abruptly, face drained of color. "Excuse me," he said, and left the room. Upstairs, the West Wing door stood slightly ajar. Cold air seeped through the gap. The corridor beyond was dim, The candles long burned out. The Baron stepped inside, his footsteps echoing. He followed the sound, faint, rhythmic, coming from behind another door farther down the hall. The silent room, as the servants called it. Once a nursery, it had been locked for nearly a decade. He pressed his hand against the door. The singing stopped. "Eleanor," he whispered. Nothing. Just the whisper of wind through old cracks, the rustle of fabric shifting in the dark. When he opened the door, his candle flickered violently. The room was empty, almost. Only a small chair overturned, and on the wall above it, drawn in something dark, were 5 uneven lines, a child's attempt at tally marks. The Baron's candle went out. Back in the ballroom, laughter had resumed, though hushed and uneasy. Mrs. Rothschild sat stiffly, her hand clutched around her locket. When the Baron finally returned, his face looked older by years. He whispered something to his wife that no one else heard. She rose at once, tears welling in her eyes, and the two slipped away together. The music stumbled to a stop. For the rest of the night, guests spoke in low voices. Some swore they saw the curtains of the west wing flutter, though no windows were open. Others said they felt a chill pass through the room, though the fire roared. When the banquet ended, the mansion returned to silence. The guests left, leaving behind only the echo of that song. By morning, Dr. Heller was gone, his carriage tracks already buried in snow. The servants were told to forget he had ever come. The Baron ordered the west wing sealed again by dusk. No explanation, no record, just another wall. But from that night onward, the family never hosted another banquet. The chandeliers remained dark, the laughter gone. And sometimes, when the wind moved through the chimneys, it carried with it a thin, melodic hum, the same lullaby that had once drifted through the vents during the winter banquet of 1890. A song the Baron could never unhear. A song for the daughter he had buried in silence. In every Rothschild record, every ledger appointment and guest book, there is one peculiar omission. A visit in January 1890, which was never logged. The estate's physician, Dr. Elias Marrow, had retired the previous autumn. But on a night thick with fog, a new doctor arrived at the gate, Dr. Amos Heller, the same man guests would later see at the winter banquet. He came without notice, without credentials on file, and with a carriage that bore no crest. The guards hesitated, but Mr. Devereux himself met him at the gate. No servant ever saw him enter. Only the faint silhouette of a man carrying a black bag led quickly toward the west wing. What happened that night would never appear in the estate's accounts. But fragments survived, a few lines from Mrs. Rothschild's private letters, smuggled years later into the hands of a family archivist who could not bear to destroy them. Letter undated, presumed January 1890. He says the child will not last the winter. Her lungs are weak, though her spirit burns so bright. I asked if she suffers. He said no, that she sings when the fever comes, soft little songs that hush her pain. I can still hear her through the wall, Edwin. I cannot bear it. Second fragment. The doctor told me not to speak of her to anyone. He fears discovery more than illness. He said her resemblance is too clear. Anyone who saw her would know. Oh, how could a child be both a joy and a curse? Those letters, though torn and half-burned, confirmed one thing. The child had been ill. And yet, Dr. Heller's visit was not for medicine alone. A later servant's account, written anonymously in 1912 by someone claiming to have been the Baron's footman, described the scene that night in chilling detail. I was ordered to bring towels and water to the West Hall. The doctor's case was open. I saw vials, not of medicine, but of something darker, laudanum, ether, and one small syringe of silver. When I returned later, the Baron was weeping into his hands. The doctor said, "It's done." Then they carried something, small and wrapped, down the corridor. I never saw it again. The man was dismissed the next morning. His wages paid double, his silence bought. Months later, when the West Wing was sealed, no one questioned the sudden appearance of a new marble plaque in the family chapel. It bore no name, only the words, "For the peace of one too loved to be known." Few understood what it meant, though some suspected. When the Baron's wife fell ill soon after, Dr. Heller returned once more, this time under his own name, now listed officially as the family's attending physician. But those who saw him that winter said his hands trembled constantly, and that he often paused mid-sentence, as though haunted by a sound only he could hear. He never spoke of what he had seen in the West Wing. Yet when he died in 1910, his niece found among his papers a note written in a shaky hand. If they open the wall, they must be gentle. The child was not alone. That line, "not alone," has confounded historians ever since. Did it mean that she was buried with someone else? Or that her spirit, in its endless waiting, had found company within those walls? Whatever the truth, one thing was clear. The doctor had helped to conceal something that night, and the guilt followed him until his final breath. The Rothschilds, ever masters of silence, continued to present a perfect image to the world. But their household was no longer the same. The windows of the West Wing were boarded from within. The servants crossed themselves when they passed it. And sometimes, on cold nights, Mrs. Langford said she could hear two voices now, the faint harmony of a child and a man humming softly together in the dark. Whether it was memory or madness, no one dared to ask, because everyone who ever asked too much ended up vanishing. It began with a cleaning day, a rare one, ordered in 1905 by a distant cousin preparing to inherit the estate. Workers cleared out the dust, cobwebs, and forgotten trunks that had gathered in the attic for decades. Most of it was junk, broken candlesticks, moth-eaten coats, and brittle books eaten through by silverfish. But then one maid, Martha Keene, found something small wedged between two beams. A locket, cracked open and half filled with soot. Inside was a faded photograph, barely visible through the grime. But what little remained was enough to shake Martha's hands. A young child, maybe 6 years old, stood before a painted curtain backdrop, her hair curled at the edges, her eyes wide and strangely familiar. She wore a delicate white dress and a pendant that shimmered faintly even in the dust. Behind her, faint, blurred, and almost ghost-like, stood a man. Only half of his face showed, but what was visible was unmistakable to anyone who'd lived in the estate long enough. Baron Edwin Rothschild himself. At first, the maid said nothing, but as curiosity gnawed at her, she mentioned it to Mrs. Langford, the housekeeper. Langford's face turned pale. She told Martha to put the locket back, to pretend she'd never seen it. But Martha didn't listen. That night, under the dim light of a single candle, she pried open the back of the locket. Behind the photo, folded so tightly it had nearly become part of the metal, was a slip of paper. 2 words were written there, in a shaky, hurried hand. "Forgive me." No signature. No date. Just those 2 words. The next morning, Martha tried to tell the steward. But when she reached for the locket in her apron pocket, it was gone. She tore through her quarters, through the trash bins, even through the ash pile by the back gate, but it had vanished. That same afternoon, the West Wing door, which had been sealed for years, was found slightly open. The estate erupted into whispers. Servants said they'd heard a soft humming from within, like a lullaby sung through stone. One of the footmen claimed he saw a light, faint, bluish light, flickering beneath the door. That night, the door was nailed shut again, and by morning, Martha Keene was gone. Her bed was neatly made, her shoes left by the door. No sign of struggle, no note, no sound of departure. Only the faint smell of lavender and candle wax in her room. The Baron, by then an old and weary man, said nothing. He ordered all talk of the maid forbidden. Her wages were quietly paid to a relative in London, though no one ever verified who. But Mrs. Langford, who had been with the family for 30 years, broke her silence in a letter written to her sister a decade later, in 1915. "I have seen the locket again. It was not lost. He took it. I saw it in his study, on the desk by the window. He keeps it near him always. There is still love in his eyes when he looks at it, but also terror, as if it might burn him from within. Sometimes, at night, I hear him whisper her name. He says it so softly, 'Clara, Clara, forgive me.' That letter was discovered in 1938 during a full archive review when the estate changed hands. And though the Rothschild heirs dismissed it as servant gossip, the timing was too precise, too deliberate. For just beneath the study window, the same one mentioned in the letter, archaeologists found a small depression in the stone floor during renovations. Inside, wrapped in linen and hidden beneath a loose tile, was a rusted locket. The photo inside was gone, but the folded paper, fragile and yellowed, still read, "Forgive me." Even now, historians can't explain how the locket found in 1905 and the one discovered in 1938 could be the same. Unless, of course, the maid never left the estate at all. Unless she, like the girl before her, had simply been swallowed by the walls. In the winter of 1931, when the world outside the estate was drowning in the Great Depression, a stranger arrived at the Rothschild gates. He was thin, pale, and carried himself with the quiet authority of a man chasing ghosts. His name, according to the guest log, was Daniel Hale, though later researchers could find no such man recorded anywhere in England. He said he was a historian, tracing forgotten bloodlines for a private archive in Vienna. But what he carried was not a historian's notebook. It was a birth certificate, browned and brittle with age, one that bore a name long whispered in the household, though never spoken aloud in the family's presence: Clara Rothschild, born 1884. The guards brought him to the steward, who hesitated before informing the family. Only Lady Marianne Rothschild, widow of the late Baron, agreed to see him. The meeting took place in the North Library, where the air smelled of old smoke and rose oil. According to her diary, she expected another journalist or treasure seeker. But Daniel Hale was different. He knew things, details no one outside the household could know. He knew that the West Wing had been sealed in March of 1890. He knew the exact inscription on the unnamed marble plaque. And when she asked how, he said quietly, "Because I was told to come." By someone who remembers her. Lady Marianne wrote of that meeting the next day, her trembling script nearly illegible. He had her eyes. I did not wish to admit it, but when he spoke, it was as if she were there again. He asked me only one thing: where she is buried. When I said I did not know, he smiled sadly, as though he had expected that answer. She described how Hale removed a small silver locket from his coat pocket, cracked, faded, and identical to the one from the archives. Inside was no photograph, only a lock of child's hair, pale gold turned almost white with age. He placed it on the desk between them and whispered, "It's time she was found." The butler, who had been standing outside the library door, later testified that the conversation grew heated. He heard raised voices, then silence. When he entered, Lady Marianne sat frozen in her chair. Daniel Hale was gone. The locket lay open on the floor, and on the window pane, drawn with the condensation of breath, was a single word: beneath. No one saw the man leave the estate. The guards swore the gates hadn't opened. But by dawn, fresh footprints appeared in the snow, leading from the library's terrace straight toward the sealed West Wing. The next day, the household found the nails ripped from the West Wing door, not broken, but carefully removed. Inside, there was no sign of Daniel Hale. Only a chair, toppled on its side. And on the wall, scratched faintly into the plaster with something sharp: "She waits for light." When the servants tried to reseal the room, they refused to enter. Each one said the same thing, that the air was colder inside, as if they had stepped underground. That a faint voice whispered from the far end of the corridor, a voice that sounded like a child's, saying the same words over and over again: "Don't leave me again." Months later, a letter arrived for Lady Marianne with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing a single line: "She was found beneath the West Hall, just as the locket said. She rests now." No one ever confirmed who sent it. But after that winter, Lady Marianne ordered the chapel restored and had a new inscription carved beneath the old one, and for the one who searched for her. Historians would later say that no man named Daniel Hale ever existed. No record, no passport, no lineage trace. But in one photograph found decades later, taken during the renovation of the estate study, a figure can be seen standing by the window, reflected in the glass. His eyes are pale, his outline faint, as if halfway between presence and memory. And in his hand, barely visible, he holds a small silver locket. By 1950, the Rothschild estate had changed hands twice. War had scarred the world beyond its iron gates, and even the most private families could no longer hide behind silence. The new owner, a French industrialist named Henri Duval, purchased the manor not for its history, but for its grandeur. He wanted to modernize it. Electric lights, marble floors, the old cellar turned into a wine hall. But during the first phase of renovations, Duval's men uncovered something no blueprint had ever shown. While cutting into the stone floor beneath the West Hall, they struck hollow ground. The echo was unmistakable. A hidden chamber. At first, they thought it was a storage vault, perhaps for wine, perhaps for the family's hidden wealth. But when the workers pried open the slabs, a heavy, sweet smell filled the air. It wasn't wine. It was time and decay. The foreman descended first, holding an electric lantern. What the light revealed silenced the entire crew. The chamber was no bigger than a nursery, a small, circular room built of limestone, its walls still damp with groundwater. At the center lay a wooden cradle, perfectly preserved, though coated in dust. Inside it, wrapped in fragments of silk and lace, was a child's skeleton, no larger than that of a 7-year-old. But it wasn't the remains that froze the men's hearts. It was what lay beside them, a small silver locket, opened. And next to it, an ivory doll, its porcelain face cracked in two. When the authorities were called, they ordered the chamber sealed as a historical site. Yet one of the inspectors, a young historian from Oxford named Edward Cross, documented everything before it was closed. His report contained an unsettling observation. The walls show signs of later modification. A second niche has been carved beside the cradle, larger, as if meant for another occupant, but empty. The press soon learned of the discovery, though the Rothschild heirs tried to suppress it. Headlines spread across Europe. Child's remains found in hidden room of old Rothschild estate. Reporters camped outside the gates. Theories flourished, from illegitimate heirs to occult experiments. But what the public never learned was that the chamber contained one more object, tucked deep within a crevice in the wall. A sheet of parchment nearly dissolved by moisture, but still legible in parts. It read, "Forgive me. She was not meant to die here. The fever took her before the doctor came. I could not bear the scandal. I walled her in to protect her from them, from the world. But her song remains. I hear it still." No signature. But the handwriting matched Baron Edwin Rothschild's journals. The chamber was resealed that same week. Duval, shaken, sold the estate within a year. The new owners, a preservation trust, kept it closed to the public for decades. But even now, caretakers say that strange things happen in the West Hall. The floor grows cold in summer. The candles flicker when no wind blows. And sometimes, in the faint quiet before dawn, a soft humming rises through the stone, the same melody heard by servants over half a century before. A lullaby. Faint, broken, but still there. When restoration crews reopened the chamber in 1972, they found it exactly as before, except for one change. The empty niche, once bare, now held something new. A pair of spectacles, modern 1930 style. The type worn by men like Daniel Hale. The estate stands silent today, its gates rusted, its halls echoing with the whispers of a story buried under marble and shame. No plaque marks where she lies. No monument names her. Only the faint inscription carved into the chapel wall, weathered, but still visible through the moss. For the peace of one too loved to be known, and for the one who searched for her. And so the question endures, whispered by those who still walk the grounds at dusk. Was Clara Rothschild truly hidden to protect her name, or to hide what she had become? No one ever answered. Only the walls know, and they do not speak, they only hum.